My name is Mabel, and perhaps the cruelest thing a mother can do is side with the man who destroyed her daughter. 3 days ago, my mom texted, "It's time you forgive Daniel and let him see the kids." Daniel, the man who attacked me when I was 16 and my mother's boss's son. I held my phone, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. For 16 years, I've tried to build a peaceful life for my 2 children, staying far from both my mother and him. But now, every boundary I've put in place is under threat. If it were you, could you forgive? Or would you protect your family to the very end? Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe to follow the next part, because this story has only just begun. I have never forgotten the night I was 16, a seemingly harmless birthday party at Daniel's house. He was 4 years older than me, the person my mother never missed a chance to praise. "Daniel's such a good young man, you should learn from him," she would often say, as if he were the perfect role model for me. Daniel's house was big and bright, music thundering from the speakers. I went with a few classmates, planning to stay only a little while. But no one could have predicted that hours later, I would bolt from an upstairs room, breathless, trembling all over. I won't relive the details, but the feeling of being cornered, silenced, turned powerless in a house full of familiar faces will never fade. I went home with swollen eyes and rumpled clothes. I thought that if I told the truth, my mom would pull me into her arms and protect me. But when I opened my mouth, Linda cut me off with a cold, sharp line. "Daniel is a good boy from a respectable family. Stop making things up." I froze as if my words had vanished into thin air. I tried to explain, tears pouring down my face, but her eyes held only annoyance, not compassion. At the time, I didn't understand why. It wasn't until much later that I learned she was working as the accountant for Daniel's mother's company, a position she'd spent years trying to get. And to her, that family's reputation mattered more than my truth. "You're ruining my life, do you understand?" she shouted when I threatened to go to the police. "If this gets out, I'll lose my job." But I had been pushed to my limit. I couldn't let the story sink into silence and turn me into someone who kept quiet to protect a man who didn't deserve it. The next morning, I went to the police station, my hands still shaking, my throat dry, and told them everything. Speaking every detail to a stranger in uniform felt like torture, but I knew I had no other choice. The investigation dragged on for months. At first, Daniel denied everything, then hired a lawyer trying to smear me, saying I was looking for attention, and into him. His words burned with humiliation, but I stayed firm. In the end, he took a plea deal: probation, a criminal record, and a permanent restraining order. Not a single day in jail. On the day of the hearing, I saw my mother sitting in the back row, her eyes as cold as a stranger's. When I left the courtroom, she didn't say a word. Mason, my boyfriend at the time, stepped forward, draped his jacket over my shoulders, and took me home. Mason was only 18 then, still in school, but his family, especially his mother, welcomed me like their own daughter. I moved in with them, starting a new life that felt strange but safer. At night, I helped Mason's mom cook. By day, I still went to school, trying to keep up as if nothing had changed. But every night, the nightmares returned. Once, I woke in the middle of the night to find myself curled up in the corner of the room, cold sweat running down my spine. Mason was already there, holding a glass of water. "I don't know what you've been through," he said, "but I believe you. And I'll be here no matter what." That promise was the only lifeline pulling me back from the edge. While my own mother chose to protect the man who hurt me, another family, people with no blood ties, chose to shield me. Still deep down, the pain never left. Not because of what Daniel did, but because the person who should have stood by me turned her back and left me to fight alone. In the years that followed, I tried to build a normal shell. I graduated, found work, and kept living with Mason's family. We didn't marry. But even as time passed, the memory of being 16 stayed, like a scar that never faded, and the image of my mother siding with Daniel cut deeper than any wound. I didn't know then that going to the police would set off a chain of events even longer and darker. One I wouldn't fully realize until years later, when I learned Daniel had never truly disappeared from my life. And my mother had never stopped trying to bring him back. Olivia was born on a crisp autumn morning, when the leaves outside the hospital window had turned a deep red. Holding her in my arms, I felt like the darkness of my past had been pushed far away. I never thought my mother, Linda, would appear in that sterile white room. But she did, standing in the doorway holding a small bouquet, her eyes red. "Mabel, I'm sorry," Her voice trembled, nothing like the way she'd spoken to me years ago. I was wrong. I want to meet the baby. Part of me wanted to throw her out, but another part, the part still aching for family, wanted to believe she was truly remorseful. I let her come closer, let her see Olivia. When she bent to kiss my daughter's forehead, my hands trembled, unsure if it was from fear or a flicker of hope. A few weeks later, Linda suggested, "If you want, you and the baby could come live with me. I'll help take care of Olivia." I hesitated, but I had just given birth. Mason was working long hours, and having my mother's help sounded reasonable. So I agreed. We moved back into the house where I grew up, now quieter and tidier than before. For the first year, everything went so smoothly I began to believe the past had been left behind. Mom woke early to make oatmeal for Olivia, knitted her hats in every color. She called me daughter again without the cold stares of before. "Focus on your studies," she said when I was about to start my freshman year of college. "Olivia will be better off with me than in daycare." I agreed, because rushing to class each morning knowing my daughter was with her grandmother was a relief. On weekends I came home, held Olivia for hours, and listened to my mom tell little stories about her. Everything seemed so peaceful I forgot how thin that peace might be. Then, in the second winter, it cracked. That day my school closed unexpectedly because of a snowstorm. Classes were canceled on Thursday and Friday, so I decided to take the bus home earlier than planned. I wanted to surprise my mom, and I couldn't wait to hold Olivia. Snow piled thick on the roof as I stepped onto the porch. Laughter floated from the kitchen. I took off my coat, walked in, and froze. Daniel was there. He wore a gray sweater, holding Olivia, who was giggling, her tiny hands tugging at his collar. My mother sat at the table next to a woman I recognized instantly, Daniel's mother. On the table, steaming cups of coffee sat like this was some normal family gathering. I felt my pulse hammering, blood roaring in my ears. "Put her down. Now." My voice came out cold, sharp enough to surprise even me. Daniel turned, his expression briefly startled before curling into a smug half-smile. "Relax, Mabel. We were only." "Put her down." I stepped forward, my voice almost a shout. Olivia began to fuss, sensing the tension in the air. My mother stood up, reaching out as if to calm me. "Sweetheart, I think it's been so many years. Daniel has changed. I turned to look at her, my eyes burning. "He's under a no-contact order with me and my child. You know that." Daniel's mother cut in, her voice gentle but laced with implication. "We all need forgiveness to heal, Mabel." I ignored her, stepped forward, and yanked Olivia out of Daniel's arms. The feel of him letting go made me want to wash my hands immediately. I held my daughter tight, turned, and walked straight to my room. While I packed Olivia's things, my mother's voice carried from the living room, pleading but edged with frustration. "What are you doing? You're going to leave in the middle of a snowstorm." "That's right," I said without turning. "And this time it's forever." I shoved clothes, toys, formula, and diapers into a bag, my hands shaking but never slowing. Every footstep on the wooden floor seemed louder in the silent house. As I carried Olivia toward the door, my mother stepped in front of me, her eyes wet. "Please, listen to me. There's nothing left to hear," I cut in. She broke into sobs, but I still walked out, the icy wind slapping my face like a wake-up call. On the porch, snowflakes landed on Olivia's hair as she buried her face in my shoulder. I carried her down the steps, my boots sinking into the thick snow, knowing I would never walk back through that door again. That night Olivia and I stayed at a close friend's house. I lay beside her, listening to her steady breathing, while my mind replayed the image of Daniel holding her, and that faint smile on his face. I knew in that moment, everything had changed. Whatever fragile trust one had left in my mother had been ripped apart, with no way back. In the months that followed, Mason and I quietly went our separate ways. He remained kind, but our paths had shifted and we both knew it was time to move on. Outside the window, snow kept falling, blanketing the street in white. But inside me, another storm had begun, silent, relentless, and certain to sweep away everything I had once thought was safe. After that snowstorm night, I took Olivia and rented a small apartment in the suburbs. We lived quietly, discreetly, with no contact with my mother or the name Daniel. As time passed, I began to rebuild a peaceful life. Years later, I married Carter. a warm, devoted man who never asked questions I didn't want to answer. Olivia grew up in the safety of our arms, becoming a bright, lively girl. 12 years after the day I left with her in my arms, Olivia was now a 12-year-old with her own world of friends, a phone and social media. I always kept an eye on things, but I tried to give her enough freedom so she wouldn't feel smothered. It started one September afternoon. Olivia brought home a small gift box from school, wrapped neatly in pink paper with a silver heart-shaped pendant inside. She said it had been left in her locker, no sender's name. I thought it might be from a classmate, but when I asked, Olivia said no one had claimed it. Before my suspicion faded, a few weeks later, a hardcover book appeared in our mailbox, about the history of the town where I grew up. Inside, I found pages marked in the section about my family's old church, with group photos where the faces had been cut out. A chill ran through me. I grew cautious. I told Olivia not to accept gifts from strangers, not to open unmarked packages. But then one evening while I was making dinner, Olivia walked into the kitchen and showed me her phone. "Mom, I made a new friend online," she said lightly, not noticing my expression change instantly. "They know a lot about our family, even old things you never told me." I took the phone. The account name was H.Lake42, with a lake landscape as the profile photo. The messages were friendly, but woven with details Olivia couldn't possibly know. My mother's old job at the import-export company, the street where I grew up, even a description of my wedding ring I had put away before Olivia was born. I asked, "Do you know this person in real life?" "No, but they said they know Grandma," Olivia replied innocently, and my heart clenched. That night, after she went to sleep, I quietly opened my laptop to trace the account. Every lead pointed to a small community group linked to a church in the next city over. The same church my mother now attended, where Daniel's mother was also active. I knew I was stepping into dangerous ground. I chose not to tell Olivia right away but began paying closer attention. I took days off work for school events so I could pick her up myself. And then my fear became reality. The first time I saw him was at one of Olivia's basketball games. Among hundreds of parents and students, I recognized that stance immediately. Slightly leaning, hands in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the court without actually watching the game. Daniel. He stood at the far end of the hallway, far enough not to violate the no-contact order, but close enough to make sure I saw him. I was torn between two choices: report him to the police and risk him disappearing before they arrived, or pretend I hadn't noticed to figure out what he was planning. Over the next weeks, I saw him again and again. At the spring concert, a children's art show, even outside the grocery store. Always keeping his distance, always within sight, as if silently reminding me, I'm still here. I didn't tell Carter right away, knowing he'd react strongly and possibly escalate things. But when Olivia received another envelope, this one containing a photo of us taken from afar, with the words "beautiful family" written under it, I couldn't stay silent. That night I showed Carter everything. The gifts, the messages, the photo. He said one thing: we're not letting him near Olivia. No matter what it takes. From that day on, we changed everything. New school routes, extra cameras at the door, no more posting family photos online. But I knew these were only temporary measures. Daniel never appeared by accident. If he was back, it meant he had a plan, and his plans always began by forcing his presence into my life. In the dark, I could feel it clearly. This wasn't just a return. It was a challenge. And he was waiting to see how I would respond. I thought Daniel lurking at the edges of events was just a psychological scare tactic. But then one February morning, I received a thick envelope from a law office. Inside was a petition, filed by Daniel and my mother. They were asking the court for family contact with Olivia, claiming my complete cutoff was damaging to the child's emotional bonds and development. The language was cold, carefully chosen to paint me as someone blocking my own daughter's rights. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the papers. Carter walked by, stopping when he saw my face. "What's going on?" he asked, pulling out a chair beside me. I handed it to him. He read for a moment, then slammed the file onto the table. "He's lost his mind. And your mother, I know." We called our lawyer immediately, James, a man in his 50s, calm but razor sharp. After hearing everything, he said plainly, "This can't be taken lightly. We'll need solid evidence showing Daniel has violated the no-contact order and is unsafe for the child. I began gathering everything I had: security camera footage of him near our house, the strange messages to Olivia, the unmarked gifts. Carter helped me print each screenshot, marking dates and times. On the day of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom with my heart pounding. Daniel sat at the other table in a sharp suit, looking composed. My mother was beside him, avoiding my eyes, her hands clenched together. The session was tense. Daniel's lawyer began smoothly, spinning it into a heartfelt tale. My client has changed. He only wishes to see young Olivia, the child he has always considered like his own daughter, to make up for lost years. Mrs. Mabel's complete cutoff has created an emotional void, harming the child. My blood boiled. Always considered like his own daughter? Daniel was never Olivia's father, and he knew it. But he also knew that in this courtroom a single phrase like that could plant a misleading seed, one I would have to work hard to uproot. James stood, presenting each piece of evidence. The big screen showed footage of Daniel lurking in the dark near Olivia's school gate, photos of his car parked by the basketball court, copies of the social media messages traced back to his email. The peak moment came when Olivia, who had only come as an observer, suddenly asked the judge if she could speak in private chambers. I sat frozen, my heart tight, as she walked away with a court officer. 20 minutes passed, each one feeling like an hour. When they returned, the judge adjusted his glasses, his tone firm. After reviewing all the evidence and hearing the child's testimony in private, I am denying the petition. Furthermore, the no-contact order will be extended indefinitely with stricter enforcement. I drew a deep breath, as if a boulder had been lifted from my chest. Daniel said nothing, but his eyes darkened when they flicked past me. That look sent a shiver down my spine. Thought it was over. But it wasn't. A few weeks later, a string of incidents began. My car got a flat tire twice in 1 month, both times right after I picked Olivia up from school. The mechanic found small, deliberate cuts in the tire wall. Nothing that could have happened by accident. A close neighbor, Mrs. Ruth, stopped by to tell me someone was spreading rumors that I was mentally unstable, and often yelled at my child in public. The gossip spread so fast that a parent at Olivia's school asked me about it outright during a meeting. Old friends gradually reached out less. Some said they'd received anonymous messages warning them to stay away from me and my family. One night, Carter came home visibly angry. Someone sent an anonymous email to my boss, accusing me of embezzling company money. Luckily, I explained everything, but clearly someone's trying to cause trouble. I knew exactly who it was, but I didn't have enough evidence to accuse him directly. Daniel had shifted tactics, no longer seeking direct contact but aiming blows at my credibility and relationships. Late one night, after Olivia was asleep, Carter and I sat in the living room, the warm light pooling over the stacks of files on the table. "You think he'll stop?" Carter asked quietly. I shook my head. "No. This is the start. He wants me to lose every support I have so he can come back and ask the court for another hearing." Carter was silent for a moment, then placed a hand on my shoulder. "Then we're not letting him." I knew he meant it. But I also knew with someone like Daniel, his strongest weapons were patience and ruthlessness. I would have to be ready for a long fight. A fight not just in court but in the smallest corners of our daily lives. I still remember the day Harper called me. That afternoon, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the phone rang. A number I didn't know, but with a familiar area code. I hesitated for a few seconds, then picked up. "Is this Mabel?" a woman's voice asked, low and a little shaky. "I'm Harper. I think we have a common enemy." The words made me pause, the paring knife hovering midair. Harper told me she had been Daniel's legal wife for 7 years, until she divorced him because she couldn't stand his control, jealousy, and subtle manipulations any longer. But signing divorce papers hadn't ended the nightmare. Daniel continued to harass her, using friends and acquaintances to watch her, find ways to approach her, and smear her reputation everywhere. "I know what he's done to you and I know he won't stop," Harper said, her voice steadier now. "I have proof. And I think we should work together." We met at a small coffee shop near the bus station. Always busy, where no one paid much attention to anyone else. Harper arrived in a heavy coat, her hair pulled into a neat bun, her eyes both wary and tired. She set a heavy bag of documents on the table, the rustle of papers inside sounding like a warning in itself. "This is everything I've gathered over the past 5 years," she said, sliding the bag toward me. "He always uses people he knows to get close to his targets, choosing those with no criminal record to be the messenger or the gift deliverer. When investigated, it all gets pinned on them acting on their own, and he never shows up directly." I flipped through the files. Photos of unfamiliar license plates parked outside Harper's home multiple times, texts from unlisted numbers spamming her phone, recordings of anonymous calls with a man's mocking laughter. The more I read, the more I recognized the patterns. They were exactly what I'd experienced. "And it's not me," Harper continued, pulling out a list. "These are women in other states he's targeted. 1 in Oregon, 2 in Texas, 1 in Kansas, all the same playbook." I looked at the list, a cold shiver running down my spine. Those names weren't numbers. They were stories, lives haunted and threatened by the same man. "I know you're tired," Harper leaned in, meeting my eyes. "But he grows stronger because we're divided. If we connect and share information, we can stay a step ahead of him." He was right. I had been fighting alone for years, and all it had done was exhaust me. "All right. Let's do it." From that day on, we started building a small network. Harper reached out to other victims through her old contacts, getting permission to share their information. I took on the task of compiling the data, sorting it by timeline, location, and Daniel's method of approach. Every week we held secure online meetings. Sometimes the two of us, sometimes with 2 or 3 other women joining. These meetings weren't only for exchanging evidence but for speaking our fears out loud, fears no one else truly understood. One night, I logged in to see Harper sitting in her living room, boxes stacked behind her like she was getting ready to move. "I have to leave," she said, her voice low but resolute. "He found my new address in just 3 months. I can't let my son live like this." I knew that feeling. I had thought about packing up and disappearing from the map too, but for Olivia, changing schools and leaving her friends would be a huge blow. I didn't want her to grow up feeling like we were always running. We set one rule. If anyone in the group spotted Daniel or one of his people nearby, they had to alert everyone immediately. A text, a call, anything to prevent someone from walking into a trap already set. Harper also helped me buy license plate recognition software linked to my home's front camera. That's how I spotted a black SUV parked 2 blocks from my house right at Olivia's school dismissal time, 3 days in a row. The plates didn't belong to Daniel, but Harper recognized it as the car of a friend he had once used to track her. Carter was skeptical at first, but when he saw the license plate list and the camera footage, he gripped my shoulder tightly. "All right. I believe you. We're not letting him win." In the following months, our network grew, from 3 people to 8, then 12. Each in a different state but all sharing the same fear. We created a digital map, marking sightings of him or his associates, with exact dates and times, to see the bigger picture of his movements. And when the dots on that map began to form a deliberate path, I realized Daniel wasn't acting randomly. He had a plan, and his main target was still me and Olivia. Harper ended one online meeting with a line I'll never forget. "He thinks we're lone prey. It's time he learned he's poking an entire pack of wolves." I had always believed I'd done enough to protect Olivia. Security cameras, altered school routes, locked down social media, every outing accompanied by Carter or me. But I'd forgotten one thing. Not every threat comes from outside. At the start of the new school year, Olivia's school announced a new guidance counselor, Mr. Matthew Lane, who would be providing emotional support and advising middle school students. When I first met him, I had no particular impression beyond his polite smile and soft voice. Olivia even told me he was very caring, often asking about her feelings and family. At first, I thought it was just part of his job. But within weeks, Olivia started mentioning questions that made me uneasy. "Mom, today Mr. Lane asked if I ever miss the grandma I don't see much," Olivia said over dinner. Then he said sometimes grown-ups have their own reasons for staying apart, but they can still love you from far away. I set my fork down. Carter glanced at me, his eyes alert. "What did you say?" I asked. "I told him I didn't want to talk about it," Olivia shrugged. But the next day he asked again about my real family. "What does that mean, Mom?" My chest tightened. Real family. The same phrase my mother and Daniel had used whenever they tried to convince the court that Olivia needed to know her roots. That night, I called the principal to discuss it. He said Mr. Lane had a spotless work record, had been a counselor at multiple schools, and had never had a complaint. But when I asked to see the details of his background check, she hesitated. I'll need to get approval from H. But rest assured, all the paperwork is in order. The unease didn't fade. I reached out to Harper, asking her to check into Matthew Lane. 2 days later, Harper emailed me a short message. Lane is actually Matthew Daniels, Daniel's first cousin. Has been connected to 2 prior harassment cases involving victims, but there wasn't enough evidence to convict. I held the phone, my hand ice cold. In an instant, all the pieces fell into place. Daniel couldn't approach Olivia directly, so he had planted someone in a position with legal access to her every day. The very next morning, I went to the school, asked to see the principal, and handed over all the information Harper had found. The principal's face went pale. She immediately called HR and the local authorities. But before the police could arrive, Matthew Lane had left the school mid-morning, citing a family emergency. No one saw him return. Just like Daniel before, he vanished cleanly, leaving behind a hollow space filled with suspicion. I thought that was the end of it. But a week later, strange things began happening at school. Olivia was called to the principal's office for a rule violation. An anonymous screenshot sent in showing her texting during class. But Olivia insisted her phone had been in her backpack at the time, and her homeroom teacher confirmed she hadn't been using it. Then my personal information, address, phone number, even my workplace, was printed out and placed in Olivia's locker, along with a handwritten note. Everyone has the right to know the truth. I began to suspect someone inside the school was helping Daniel, or at least leaking information to him. But who could it be? HR? An office staff member? Or even a student under his influence? Carter urged me to call the police, and I did. But the familiar response came back. No direct evidence. Meanwhile, Olivia started to withdraw. She no longer bubbled over with stories about school, often staying quiet through dinner. One night, when I went into her room to say goodnight, she asked softly, "Mom, why would someone want me to meet Mr. Daniel so badly? I don't even know him." I squeezed her hand, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Because some people think they have the right to decide someone else's life. But you are not responsible for that." Inside, I knew this had gone far beyond ordinary harassment. This was a psychological game, where Daniel didn't want access to Olivia, but wanted to shatter her sense of safety in the one place that was supposed to be safest, her school. Harper suggested we install monitoring software on Olivia's phone and computer to track suspicious contact. A few days later, the program flagged a school email sent to Olivia with a link for extra assignments. But in reality, it led to a blank page with one line, "We'll see each other soon." When we traced it, the email had been sent from a shared internal school account used by multiple staff members. That meant the sender had legitimate access to the school system. I called the principal that same night, demanding they suspend all system access and conduct an internal investigation. But I knew, just like before, the person behind it would erase the trail before being caught. Carter sat down beside me, speaking quietly. "You see what he's doing, right? He doesn't just want to get to Olivia. He wants us to feel like he has someone everywhere." And that was the most dangerous part of this game. Not the times he lurked at the edge of a basketball court or sent anonymous gifts, but the creeping feeling that anyone, from a teacher to the cafeteria staff, could be part of his network. And when your opponent is someone who is patient, someone who spreads fear through small but constant touches, you know you have to be ready for a fight that lasts longer than you imagined. The envelope arrived on a Monday morning. No sender's name, just a few words. "Meet at Riverside Park, 3 p.m. Thursday. Alone." I read it over and over, my fingers unconsciously tightening on the paper's edge. Carter walked into the kitchen, catching my expression. "Something again?" I handed it to him. He frowned, his voice hardening. "This could be a trap. You're not going alone." I knew he was right, but the urge to face this head-on was too strong. For months, Daniel had stayed hidden, using others to reach and harass us. If I had a chance to cut off one link in this chain, I couldn't let it pass. We agreed on a plan. I would go, but Carter would be nearby, along with Harper and a friend from the network, watching from a distance. I'd also carry a recorder in my coat pocket. That afternoon, cold wind rustled through the bare trees of Riverside Park. I walked to a bench near the lake, where the gray water reflected the winter sky. A familiar figure sat there, shoulders slightly hunched, hands clasped. It was my mother. Linda wore an old sweater, her graying hair falling loosely on either side of her face. When she saw me, she stood, her eyes brightening for a moment, but also full of awkwardness. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice small and shaky. I have something important to tell you." I stopped a few steps away, keeping my distance. "Where's Daniel? This is his business, not yours." She looked down, hesitating. "He can't come. But he asked me to pass along a message. If you agree to send him one picture of Olivia each year, he'll leave you and her alone." "And if I don't agree?" She looked up, fear and pleading in her eyes. "He says he'll destroy your life. Everything you've built will fall apart. You know he can do it." The woman standing before me had once been the person I looked to for protection. Now she was delivering an ultimatum from the man who had destroyed my youth. "You're still on his side. After all these years, you still choose him over me." She began to cry, reaching out, but I stepped back. "I have no choice," she choked. "He knows things about me. If he tells, I'll lose everything." "You've always had a choice, you just never chose me," I said slowly, clearly. "And today is no different." I turned and walked away. Carter appeared from a distance, his eyes a mix of worry and anger. I shook my head, signaling it was done. Harper stepped forward from the bench across the path, discreetly asking, "Did you get the whole thing recorded?" I nodded. That same night, I went to the police station, handed over the full recording, and recounted the meeting in detail. The desk officer listened, then sighed. "She's participated in aiding someone under a no-contact order. We'll be speaking with Mrs. Linda." The investigation moved faster than I expected. Even though Linda denied it, the recording was undeniable. In the end, she was charged with aiding, but because of her age and clean record, the court gave her probation and 200 hours of community service. I didn't attend the hearing. Carter picked up a copy of the judgment and handed it to me. I read it, then set it on the table. There was a hollow space inside me, not quite relief, not quite pain. Once again, I felt the chasm between me and my mother had become an unbridgeable gulf. But I also knew that Linda's conviction, however light, was a signal to Daniel. He could no longer use others without being exposed. Harper called me that night. "This is the first step. He'll know we're not easy to play." The information Harper sent me on a late May evening made me sit in silence for minutes. "Daniel is in Arizona," she wrote. Alias, Thomas Keene. Working night security at a luxury resort. I read the message over and over, feeling both relieved and tense. Relieved because we finally had a clear lead, but tense because I knew, with Daniel, being exposed was the signal for him to disappear again. Harper said she got the information from an old friend in the security industry who happened to recognize Daniel's face in an employee photo. We immediately contacted the FBI and local police. A surveillance plan was set up, with the resort's security staff quietly rotating shifts so Daniel wouldn't get suspicious. For 2 weeks, they tracked his habits, work hours, residence, travel routes. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until one Monday morning when an FBI agent called me, his voice clipped. "He's gone." Daniel had walked out mid-shift, left his uniform behind, and vacated his rented room. Security footage showed him getting into a white SUV with Mexican plates. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over me. He had slipped away again. But 2 weeks later, an unexpected email appeared in the private inbox I used only for the victim's network. "I'm Sophia. I need help. I'm Daniel's wife." I was immediately suspicious. It could be a trap. But the message included personal details about Daniel that only someone close to him would know. A small scar on his left wrist, the habit of grinding his teeth while asleep, and the fact that he always hid a spare key in the heel of his shoe. We arranged a secure video call. On screen, Sophia appeared with dark circles under her eyes and a plain room in the background. She spoke quickly, her voice a mix of fear and exhaustion. "I want to leave him. He doesn't just control me, he watches other people. I know who you are. I know what he's done to you." I asked why she was reaching out now. Sophia swallowed hard. "He thinks I'm loyal, so he let me see some files. But when I found out he has a list of over 10 families in the US that he's been watching, I couldn't stay silent." Sophia agreed to work with the FBI in exchange for protection for herself and her 2 young children. Over the next several months, she secretly recorded conversations, photographed documents, and sent location updates every time Daniel left home. Daniel seemed to trust her completely, never suspecting that his young wife was quietly dismantling his safety net. One September night, Sophia sent exact coordinates. He was at a rented apartment on the outskirts of Mexico City, alone, asleep after an extra shift. The FBI coordinated with Mexican police for a pre-dawn raid. I remember the feeling when I got the call from the lead agent on the case. We have him. No resistance at all. Inside the apartment, they seized multiple laptops, hard drives, phones, and a locked file cabinet. Inside were records proving he had monitored at least 12 families across several states, all with one thing in common: women who had reported him or his relatives in the past. There were long-distance photos, copies of personal documents, house layouts, even weekly schedules for each target. My name and Olivia's were in a separate folder, along with pictures of her from years ago to the present. Hearing that made me shiver, yet I also felt relief. The truth about what he'd done now had solid proof. It wasn't just my or Harper's word anymore. The FBI said Daniel would be held in Mexico while awaiting extradition to the US. This time they believed he wouldn't slip away so easily. Sophia and her children were moved to a safe location under federal protection. That night, I sat in the living room, the warm light spilling over the walls, Carter setting a cup of tea in front of me. Olivia was already asleep, her hair fanned across the pillow like the peaceful years before all this had been disturbed. "You all right?" Carter asked. "I'm all right, at least for tonight." News of Daniel's detention pending extradition spread quickly, not only through the victims' network but also in the small community where we lived. Harper called me as soon as she heard from the lead agent. "This time he's not getting out, Mabel. Him and everyone who's helped him, they're all within reach of the law now." I wanted to believe that completely, but after all these years, I knew absolute certainty was a luxury. Still, knowing most of his network had been arrested loosened some of the pressure in my chest. Then came the call from my sister. Our mother had been hospitalized after a stroke. Just a few days later, she passed away before Daniel's trial could begin. Standing in the funeral home, I stared at the closed casket, feeling both empty and heavy. There were so many questions I had wanted to ask her. Secrets I knew she had taken to the grave. Why she had defended Daniel to the end. Why she had stayed silent while he drew closer to me and Olivia. But now there would never be answers. My sister rested a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "No matter what, you're still Mom's daughter." Family to me now felt like a book with the last page missing. You never truly know how it ends. After the funeral, I returned to our family's routine. Olivia, now 15, surprised me by signing up for the school's spring play. She'd gotten a minor role, but her excitement made me happy. In the evenings, she'd practice lines in front of the mirror while Carter and I sat on the couch, the most patient audience in the world. My little boy, Ethan, started preschool. Each morning, I walked him to the car, listening to him chatter about the new teacher with blonde hair and the friend who likes building blocks. Those sounds, ordinary as they seemed, became the new background music of my life. A melody I once wasn't sure I'd get to hear again. One late afternoon while I was preparing dinner, Olivia walked into the kitchen holding a photo album she'd bought from the school's souvenir shop. "Mom, I want us to make a new family album. This one. To start over." I smiled, dried my hands, and sat at the table with her. We picked recent photos. Ethan grinning while hugging the neighbor's dog, Carter lifting Olivia high on a summer beach, all of us planting trees in the garden. And then there was one special photo. On performance night, I'd asked a parent in the front row to take it for me. In the picture, Olivia was in her costume, standing center stage among the cast, smiling brightly. Carter and I stood beside her, Ethan in my arms, all of us laughing. Behind us were rows of audience members, familiar faces from our neighborhood, from school, from the parents' group, people who had stood by, protected, and believed me when my story was doubted. Olivia pointed to that picture. "Mom, let's put this one at the end of the album. So when we look back, we'll remember, we're not alone." For years, I'd lived in constant vigilance, always afraid. I still lock the door twice every night. That habit won't disappear. But now the reason is different. It's no longer because I'm haunted by the thought of Daniel coming back. It's because I know what I'm protecting. A family, a home, the sound of laughter at dinner, is worth guarding with everything I have. That night, with Ethan asleep and Olivia doing homework at the table, Carter handed me a cup of hot tea. I opened the album, turned to the last page, and looked at the photo of our family on Olivia's performance night. The stage lights shone on her face, and behind her was the community that had sheltered us. I smiled softly. The darkness might still be out there somewhere, but in this frame there was only light, and that's what I wanted to remember. You know, sometimes what we lose makes room for a new way to hold on to what truly matters. I still don't know if I'll ever have all the answers about the past, but I've found peace in the present, surrounded by those willing to stay and protect each other. What about you? If it were you, after everything that happened, would you keep your guard up like I do, or would you learn to let go completely? I truly want to hear your thoughts. And if you want to walk with me through more stories about family loss and the ways we find strength again, subscribe to the channel. There are many more everyday stories that will touch your heart waiting for you ahead.